All right, so let's talk about dividends and bonds. All right. Now, before we jump in, I want to make sure you subscribe. We tend to forget that. Yeah. I feel like every single show. But I definitely want to jump in, to this discussion about dividends and bonds, because I feel like they both have this little bit of conservative, outlier to them that, dividends are for old people, bonds are for old people.
Right.
But are they both safe? Are they both reliable? Do they both do the same thing? Because if they're labeled as an older person investment, then there's got to be similarities, pros and cons. But at the same time, we know there's differences.
Right. I think overall, they're both considered that safe play. Mm-hmm. It's when you get older and you don't need to worry about growth as much, then you shift into this bond or this dividend. Right. And it's typically because you get income from it, right?
Mm-hmm. The percentage based on your age, that's been around for the longest time. You phase out.
The 60-40.
Yeah, the 60, yes.
When I think about a bond, I think about my son being like, hey, Dad, can I borrow $20? Yeah. And you hear, borrow, the word borrow.
Oh, borrow.
Hey, can I borrow $20? Yeah. And you're like, yeah. Are you going to pay me back? Yeah, Dad. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
my
pay
favorite
you back.
was in college. They used to say, hey, let me hold $10. That was what my roommates would be like. Let me hold $10.
That was a word.
How long are you holding it? I think some of them might still be holding it.
Still hold it. That's funny.
But on the flip side, you think about the dividend, and obviously it's no secret we love dividends around here. I feel like it's my grandma and grandpa, that every time I saw them, they'd be like, when I was leaving, they'd be like, hey, they'd slip me a 50 or something, when I was a kid, and they're just like, good job.
Yeah.
Love you, and you just you never expected it, but you kind of knew what they did and you loved it when they did it.
Positive surprise, if you will.
Yeah.
Right.
Positive surprise.
Yeah.
Some road money.
All right. So let's talk about why this comparison matters. So first of all, for retirees, everybody wants reliability and stability.
Oh, yeah.
Right out of the gate.
You're out of time.
Well, and they're used to having it most of the time, right? They've had this job that's paying them a consistent paycheck. It's reliable.
Both bonds and dividends promise income, but they do it in completely different ways. I mean, this is the heartbeat of this show, this episode, is the fact of how different these two vehicles produce income, because it's vastly different. Now let's talk about the analogy about that.
Think of it as renting an apartment versus owning a home. Both gives you shelter, but one comes with keys and control, the other with a landlord's rules. I really wanted to say that as is, because it's really pretty cool. But people get used to a certain thing, but is that certain thing enough? And sometimes I think of that with bonds, whereas, if you open up your mind to the potential for income with growth, but some people get so afraid because they hear the word stock and they hear growth and they worry about loss at the same time. And they think sometimes of bonds as being the steady. It's always going to be there. But there's some risk there too.
Well, there's no ownership, just like the apartment. You can't control it. You want to refresh the outside of your apartment. You can put a plant. You can put a new rug. You can't paint anything.
Right.
You can't touch the grounds. I mean, you have zero control over a bond. And you're thinking, well, how could you have any control over a stock? Well, it's completely different. There's risks into selling either one. Right. And there's benefits into selling either one. One has a lot of potential for benefit. One has a little potential for benefit, because one's controlled by the market, which is highly emotional, irrational, and sometimes predictable. And then you have others that are controlled by interest rates, which don't move very often.
Right.
And when you do, you're kind of stuck, and you can almost see it coming for the most part. Okay. So let's talk about bonds first, then we'll jump into dividends. So first, what are the pros? What are the reasons you'd want to buy a bond?
I mean, the very first one is the predictable income. Like, know exactly whenever you purchase that bond, based on how much you're going to invest into it, exactly what you're going to get and for how long that term is.
Yes.
Yep. It's steady Eddie. You know what you're getting, like you said. And in theory, you're getting it from a reliable source, government, whatever it may be. You believe the contract, they're going to withhold up to it. So this is standard.
There's definitely benefits to a bond because of the fact that it's truly safer than most reliable investments out there. Like, a dividend is not guaranteed. Now, you could also say a bond is not guaranteed, but there are certain bonds that are backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government.
Right.
There's no dividend out there that's backed by the full faith of the United States government.
Right.
But then you ask a lot of people about it, and they're like, well, the government isn't profitable.
Right.
They're not killing it on all, every
Yep.
cylinder. They're just stealing from Peter to pay Paul. And most of the time they don't even pay anybody back.
And if it was a business, you may not invest in it. Like
Exactly.
Right.
Right.
The government is a horrible model to follow. They make their own rules as they go. Okay. But nonetheless, they've got a blank checkbook, that they can do whatever they want with because they don't play by rules.
That's right.
Okay. What are some of the negative aspects of a bond?
Well, there's no real potential for like your initial investment. That if you invest $100,000, that $100,000 doesn't grow.
Mm-hmm.
And then
So
you're
at the end of
buying
your
that.
term, you just get it back. You hope. So it's like you have this inflationary risk that how much is my $100,000 worth in 5 or 10 years now that I've received that back?
That is a big thing that we're going to talk about a little bit more. Were you going to say something?
No, it's huge. And it comes up kind of similarly to pensions, right? They stay the same. And as the world increases the price of buying stuff, it buys less for you.
Yep.
Similarly with bonds, that doesn't keep up with
There's
inflation.
a lot of listeners out there that, have been around the investment block a few times. And a lot of our clients, if you ask them, like, hey, when we bought our first home, interest rates were pretty low. And a lot of people in the last decade that have purchased their first home their experience of buying it was like, 2% mortgage, 4% mortgage. You talk to a lot of our clients, a lot of people who were buying houses in the 70s and 80s. They're like, well, my experience was a whole lot different. I can remember my first mortgage. It was 16%. It was 18%, and there's like, you have no idea how good you have it. So let's flip that around. Instead of buying a mortgage or taking out a mortgage, we're buying a bond in that environment. And you got used to, the same conversation's just different. Cause now we're like, bonds suck. We're talking about like 2% interest. Like, what's that going to do for me? They were like, well, when I was your age, when I bought my first home, things were horrible. But bond interest was like 16%. CDs were 15%. I can remember the first CD I ever took out. It was paying me 15%. But the problem with that is you get almost complacent with the return you're making. And they're like, hey, I was used to making, if I invested $100,000, not a lot of people had $100,000 back then, but if you put $100,000 into a bond or a CD, you're making $15,000 of income on $100,000. That's crazy.
Yep.
Right.
Protected, secured, backed. Almost no risk. But the problem is that $100,000, let's say you did that for 15 years and rates stayed high above 10% for 15 years. You still had that $100,000. What changes in inflation in 15 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Milk, gas,
Everything.
Yeah.
Well, your $100,000 that used to produce you $15,000 is still the same $100,000 15 years later. And now rates are like at 8%. So that one investment that was so good, producing you $15,000 is now only generating you $8,000. And there was never any growth on the underlying investment.
Right.
This is probably the worst scenario, real to life, of a bond.
Yep.
Because there's zero growth most of the time on a bond. There can be certain situations where you can get a little bit more when you sell, depending on interest rates, when you buy, when you sell. But most of the time, you're stuck living on a fixed income with a fixed asset that never changes. It's like buying a government-backed pension.
Yeah.
That's
You get
susceptible
return
to
of principal.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
kind of the only.
You're losing money
Great thing.
safely.
you're safely gonna
That's a
run
Charlie
out of
Bowers
money.
shout out, but it so resonates. You're losing money safely.
Yeah.
That's a big issue. All right, let's talk about the case for dividends. What are some pros?
Well, the biggest one for me is yes, you're getting paid, and usually we find great predictable income, but it's also increasing. So you may be able to invest $100,000 in the first time you get your dividend, it's $5,000, but then next year it's 5,500. The next year it's maybe 61. Then you have this continuing growth that can happen that snowballs that actually helps you against inflation, which is the big one there.
Inflation hedge is a huge one.
Yeah.
Both on the value and on the dividend, which is amazing. So
Well, that's the other one is
Right.
your value, your $100,000 has the ability to grow as well. Now it has the ability to go down as well, but
yeah.
if you're investing in the right companies, you have a much higher predictability.
We could make that same argument against bonds. Bonds have the ability to lose value.
Correct.
Because if interest rates go a certain direction, the bond prices go down and you could be stuck holding a rotten egg, you know, and things turn bad. And the flip side, things can happen as well. Now, if you hold it to maturity, you know, you can get your principal back in the bond, but the reality is, what are you losing to hold it? And a lot of times people are just bailing. So, you know, the realities are, there are, whatever we're going to say as a pro or a con can relate to the other for a dividend versus a bond. But there are some differences where you can have highly appreciated value in a dividend stock. So you can buy a stock for $10 and it can be worth $400.
Yep.
That ain't never going to happen in a bond.
Nope.
You know, they're $100 par values, and the best case scenario, you're going to get a tick or two.
Yep.
You know, it might go up to 110 or something.
Well,
like that.
and the key is that you do have to plan, because you can't be in a spot where you need that money while it's down, because inevitably it will come back up. But if you have to go and tap into that money while it's down, that could hurt. And that's what I think scares some of they're afraid of that potential for fall, whereas you may not have to realize the fall if you time and do some planning, because you can rely on the income, to your earlier point with the dividend.
Right.
And there's some liquidity risk with it, right?
Sure.
Like you just can't cash out.
You can't.
So if you're in the dire need, you need something immediately.
It can be tough to get that.
It's pretty
bond.
challenging to sell that off.
What are some cons for dividend stocks?
Well, obviously, you have the dividend cut to where, because it is not predictable, it's not guaranteed. You're basically relying on the profitability of these companies to pay the dividend, where a bond is actually debt to the company that they owe to you. So if the profitability in a company shifts, or they have some bad leadership, make poor decisions financially, they can cut, suspend, end the dividend. You know, there's all kinds of things that can happen there. The stock price can go down. There's a lot of negatives, I guess, that could potentially be there. So you can't set it and forget it and just be like a bond where it's like, well, I know I got this for the next 10 years. I'll check it out in 9 and see what we can do next.
Well, the funny thing is, we would never say set it and forget it, but there are dividend companies out there who have been paying for 50 years.
Sure.
And the likelihood
increasing
is like,
for just as much.
Yeah. So you're just like, well, if I buy this stock, the likelihood is that they're not going to cut it. They're not going to stop paying it. They're just going to pay forever, because they have a track record of paying for a lot longer than any other bond that I've ever seen.
Sure.
Right.
You know, so the longevity of this stock, and again, I'm not suggesting we'd ever set it, forget it, but you can look back in history and go, wow. Now there are examples of like AT&T where they've been paying forever and then they just decided to change.
Yep.
That's why you never set it and forget it. But you can find predictable income even in an unpredictable world, like dividend investing, where just like, holy smokes, as long as you keep your ear to the grindstone, you're like, well, you can hear it coming.
That's right.
Sometimes we miss that timing because we're just greedy.
Yeah.
But you can see the smoke rising.
That's
you're
right.
like, something bad's going to happen here. Let's just hold on a little bit longer. You're like, oh, why did we do that?
Yep.
You know, I mean, this happens all the time. All right,
It
let's
does,
look back in history, and let's do a reality check. I didn't get any numbers on this, but if we were looking at the overall performance, and we can just talk in generalities here, which is going to do better historically, bond or dividend stock?
I mean, a dividend-paying stock, I would have to think, would just
Without a
be
doubt.
light years beyond
Aristocrats
this.
is what comes to mind.
Without
with
a
that.
doubt, dividend stocks are going to outperform in long run. Now, there are specific isolated situations when you can go back in high yield environments where the stocks didn't do anything and interest rates were so high that bonds outproduced. Like I can tell you, if you would have bought a CD, I think it was from like 2000 all the way to 2011. I have to go back and you can fact check me on this. But CD returns actually outperformed the S&P 500 over a decade in the last 25 years.
Wow.
Okay. Which is crazy. So there are isolated situations where you can find the 70s and 80s. We could probably argue the exact same
really
thing
high
before Reagan
rates.
became president.
Yeah.
The market went, I mean, there was called the lost decade. The market actually went nowhere. Interest rates were high. You would have made more money in a bond and a CD than you would in the market. You would have actually lost money in the market over the same period of time. So yes, there are definitely situations where, because we do get comments, you're like, you're telling me this? Yes, I'm telling you this. Historically, long-term stocks will always outperform or always have outperformed bonds, but there will be isolated situations. And I don't think we're anywhere near any of those danger zones right now where interest rates are, because there's pressure to get them lower.
Right.
That is a bad environment for bonds.
Yeah.
Period. Okay.
Yeah. You got a lot of.
So what are some
lot of risk.
takeaways? Let's shut this down. What are some takeaways?
I think, bonds, knowing what you're getting yourself into, they are safe, but I think that if safety and security and predictability for your retirement income is what you're striving for, I think they could play a piece of that, but I think there's some better options out there for you.
Yeah. Anybody else?
And I would just chime in that I think in all cases, planning is important, because in a lot of cases, you need a little bit of time to plan so that you never have to get out of a bond or a stock at the wrong time, getting lost of just the income. So planning, it's important as we sit here and just talk about them as you have to plan individually.
Yeah, it's just truly understanding your specific situation, right? So some people might want that more safety, others want some more growth and more inflation hedge. So it's just, evaluating what you got and seeing where you need to go moving forward.
Yeah, I would say, if we were to look at specifically just bonds and stocks, there's no overall bad choice. There's no overall great choice. Obviously, we're going to be slanted towards the dividend side of things for a lot of different reasons. But in every situation, we could look at a bond and go, hey, in this environment, in this investment, in your situation, because of the plan, because of your situation, you're like, this makes perfect sense. So I totally agree. Like, you have to understand your situation before you invest in any one investment, like a bond or a stock. So it's not just about the investment. It's about your knowledge and how the investment fits your own situation. So although we do love dividends. Last thing, we're going to shut this thing down. If you're new to investing, or it's not your first rodeo, we've got this, but you don't know much about dividends. We've got a dividend starter kit. We put this together a long time ago. It's pretty awesome. All you need to do is get it. Is first subscribe to the show, and then secondly, just add a comment in the comment section below, or you can DM us and just say dividend starter kit, or ask a question about it. We'll contact you back. We'll find out a way to get your email, and we'll shoot it right to you. It's absolutely free. There's no cost. So thanks, guys. This is a good show. God bless.